Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the WTS Greater Chicago Chapter Equity in Transportation panel. This is our second episode. I'm Harvin Singh, WTS Diversity Committee member and president of Singh & Associates. Today's panel discussion will focus on project development, strategies that support diversity, equity, and inclusion, and some might even say support ending violence in cities. Before we get started with introductions, I would like to share a few announcements. WTS is seeking nominations for the 2022 WTS Greater Chicago Chapter Awards. Nominations are due on October 29th, 2021, and can be emailed to awards@wtsgreaterchicago.org. Also, watch out for registration information for WTS events in November. November 4th will be our membership event at Jefferson Tap. November 10th, our 2021 Central Region Virtual Conference, Onward and Upward. November 10th is our professional development program in planning and environmental linkages. And then we'll also have a virtual partnership breakfast. So to get us started, it's my pleasure to introduce Tanya Adams, Vice President of Inclusion and Diversity at WSP USA, Community Relations and Equity Manager. Tanya will introduce our moderator for today. Good morning, Tanya. I'll let you take it away.
Thank you so much, Harvin. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, WTS, for the opportunity to participate in the Equity in Transportation series. During the first episode in June, local experts shared inclusion practices for community engagement and public involvement. Today's panel will discuss project development practices that encourage equitable and inclusive outcomes. And we look forward to future episodes in 2022 focused on innovative and project implementation and workforce development to address matters for DEI. At this time, I am honored and pleased to introduce our amazing moderator. Ms. Janet Henderson is the Business Development Director for Images, where she has managed public involvement on many projects throughout the state, including Illinois High-Speed Rail, I-55 managed lanes, I-80 improvements, and Illinois 57 Pell and Quincy. Janet is passionate about her work in increasing the awareness and participation in the transportation planning process. Good morning, Janet.
Good morning. Thank you, Tanya. And good morning to everyone, and thank you for joining in today. Tackling the issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion is huge and can seem overwhelming, so I really appreciate WTS putting on this series to break it down. They'll help us understand how to address this in all aspects of a project and in doing business. This event today will focus on the planning phase and the strategies used in project development to address equity and inclusion in the process. There's a box at the bottom of your screen labeled Q&A. This is where you can enter any questions you have, and we'll go through all of these at the end of the presentations. We have 4 expert panelists joining us today. They have a variety of experiences that they will share with us. This includes Gina Tremarco. She's the Assistant Vice President for Trans Systems. Gina has been involved as both a transportation planner and project manager during her career. She has had to consider the potential impacts of transit and roadway projects on an environmental justice communities, including identifying, addressing, and mitigating disproportionately high and adverse effects on minority and low-income populations. Nicole Adewale is the principal and co-founder for ABNA. As co-founder, Nicole is highly involved in the day-to-day running of ABNA, which has grown from its humble beginnings as a 2-person firm to more than 90 professionals and union tradespeople across 3 offices, performing work in more than 13 states. Audrey Wennink is the Director of Transportation for the Metropolitan Planning Council. Audrey directs MPC's transportation efforts and coordinates transportation initiatives with other facets of planning, including affordable housing, land use, equity, and the environment. Tara Orbon is the Chief Engineer for Project Development Bureau at the Cook County Department of Transportation and Highways. She has over 20 years of professional experience in transportation planning and engineering, both in government and private consulting. Her responsibilities include overseeing the development of the department's multi-year capital program with projects aimed at supporting the economy, creating livable communities, and holistically addressing mobility challenges for people and goods. I will turn it over to Tara to get us started.
Thank you, Janet. My name is Tara Orbon. I'm the Chief Engineer of the Project Development Bureau for the Cook County Department of Transportation and Highways. And in this role, I oversee development of the department's 5-year capital plan, our annual budget, intergovernmental agreements, project studies, it's also called phase 1 studies, traffic services, mechanical, electrical operations, as well as land acquisition. Now, Cook County is at the center of the nation's 3rd largest metropolitan area with nearly 2 million households and more than 5 million residents. We are also at the center of our nation's transportation infrastructure with access points to national and global markets with our 2 major airports, 10 interstate expressways, 6 of the 7 Class 1 railroads, 16 intermodal facilities, and the Port of Chicago. Cook County also accounts for 43% of all jobs in Illinois. The Chicago region's role as the freight center of North America brings jobs, wages, sales, and revenue, but it also presents challenges of greater congestion, wear and tear on the roads, aging infrastructure, and the need to adapt to a rapidly changing economy. The COVID-19 pandemic has also posed unprecedented challenges to the way that people travel, engage in commerce, and also use transportation services. So strong transportation investments are essential for this region to grow and support the needs of our residents. Cook County's long-range transportation plan was adopted about 5 years ago, and it expands on the previous role of the Cook County Department of Transportation and Highways is just a maintenance agency. And it broadened the scope of this department to take an active role in addressing current and future challenges to the mobility of people and goods. The plan encourages the county to leverage its assets, which I just mentioned, they're incredible, right? To influence the development of transportation infrastructure that may not be under county jurisdiction, including transit, bicycle, pedestrian, and freight facilities. So I don't know about you guys, but even before I started working here, I had to think like, what does that mean? Not even under county jurisdiction? Yes. If not for us, then who? That is what we see as our role. We have partnered with, several local municipalities and other agencies to advance critical transportation projects by providing financial assistance as well as staff resources. But beyond jurisdictional responsibilities, this department is uniquely positioned to provide transportation leadership, expertise, and resources where required to advance projects that cross agency and municipal boundaries. So all that being said, and just as important, transportation matters because it provides access to opportunities such as jobs, schools, healthcare, fresh food, and much more. Within Cook County, however, transportation services and the opportunities they afford are not equally distributed. Residents and businesses of low and moderate income communities travel further to get to jobs and have experienced less economic growth because of historic disinvestment. Under the leadership of President Preckwinkle, Cook County is committed to reducing inequality by ensuing policies and fiscal decisions that meet the needs of all residents, especially residents who are often marginalized and excluded from decision-making. In 2017, the Cook County Department of Transportation and Highways initiated the Invest in Cook program. This is an $8.5 million annual program that funds planning and feasibility studies, engineering, land acquisition and construction for transportation improvements sponsored by not us, but by local agencies. The Invest in Cook program aims to address longstanding inequities by targeting transportation investments in support of business expansion and job creation in disadvantaged communities by improving transportation options for low, moderate income and minority residents in Cook County. Since 2017, the department has awarded $39.7 million in grants for 162 projects across the county. For every dollar invested over the course of Invest in Cook, an additional $3 have been leveraged for projects throughout the county. So our transportation system is one of our region's most important assets, and I look forward to our discussion today on how diversity, equity, and inclusion can be incorporated into the project development process. And in closing, I would like to give a special thanks to Duana Love and Gabriela Garcia from the Diversity Committee, as well as WTS, for the opportunity to speak with you today. The previous panel, before us, they really helped to deepen our understanding of the impacts of past policies and, who may have been left behind. And this conversation is important so that we can work together so that all people can live in a region that meets their needs and where they can participate, prosper and reach their full potential. So thank you again for being with you today. And now I will turn it over to Gina.
Okay, thank you, Tara. So I'm Gina Tremarco, and I'm with Trans Systems. I'm heading up the transit and transportation planning team in our Chicago office. And my career has really been focused on transportation planning, most recently transit planning over the last 15 years here at Trans Systems. And I've been on both the agency side and the private consulting side. And because many of our transit projects in particular that I'll address are federally funded, we follow federal requirements and guidelines, including NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act guidelines. And since 1994, federal requirements have required projects to address environmental justice in minority populations and low-income populations to make sure that none of the projects are disproportionately affecting high EJ populations, disproportionately high in adverse effects in EJ populations. So it comes naturally as part of a transit plan to always consider minority, low-income populations when we're doing any type of service planning. But we do expand the definition of what we consider diverse populations from those categories. And we include other transit-dependent populations, such as those who are essential workers, those who are, no car households, communities that don't have English as their first language, non-English speaking populations, those with disabilities. So we always take into consideration a diverse population when we are doing our transit planning. But in the recent focus of diversity, inclusion, and equity, we've really had to step up our game. In the past, we've always acknowledged where those communities are and how our plans are affecting those communities, and ideally in a positive way. But we've held public meetings or workshops, and the same people or type of people tend to come to those type of meetings. So what we've really had to do and have done more recently is really try to reach out to communities who are more impacted by the transit plans or the other planning efforts we've done. And we've done that in a variety of ways. We've utilized our DBE subcontracts or stakeholders to really identify those populations and reach out to those community groups that we really want to bring to the table. I'm working on a project in Hartford, Connecticut right now, where it's a multimodal planning study, and we've really had to reach out to more diverse communities in that greater Hartford area. And so we're currently utilizing a women-owned minority business who meets frequently with the community on a variety of topics. She holds lunch meetings and attends PTA meetings and goes to festivals and so on. And so we're really asking her to help us reach those group of stakeholders and ask them what their transportation needs are in the greater Hartford area. We're also meeting with a disabilities advocacy group to understand the needs that people with disabilities have for their transportation requirements. Currently working on DuPage County mobility study, where again, we're trying to identify where different populations that are transit dependent or transportation really dependent live and work, and how we can best serve those in the future. Because right now, there's transportation services throughout the county, but those transportation services might not necessarily reach people who are shift workers or essential workers or don't know how to reach those services. McHenry County Transit Plan that we worked on a few years ago with Janet, our moderator here. We utilized Janet images to help us reach a Spanish-speaking population. So by attending church services and then meeting with the congregants afterwards to identify what their transit needs were was very helpful for the overall plan. So having those in the community where the plan is, where we're studying the transportation services or the transit services and really getting buy-in from the community members and identifying the benefits and the impacts rather than us telling them what they need is really essential as we move forward with our diversity, inclusion, and equity planning process. Nicole, thank you.
Thank you, Gina. So, Nicole Adewale, I'm with a private engineering company that serves the Midwest. In Chicago, we offer a wide range of services between water, rail, roads, and bridges. But how do we contribute to equity and inclusion in the industry? It's been for us internships for students from populations that are generally underrepresented in the architecture, engineering, and construction industry. We have been very successful in converting interns to permanent employees. We've also been engaged in a number of projects where there's been a community benefits agreement and offerings for students to come in and work as interns on those projects and learn more about the industry. We believe that as civil engineers, because we're serving the public, we have to be part of the community and part of a myriad of diverse communities. So we encourage our employees to serve on local zoning boards, elected officials, and also I think we represent probably about 5 to 6 different universities through either adjunct professorships or service on boards with, for instance, Chancellor's Council. We recently won a project in the St. Louis area to provide a pavement study for 24 small municipalities working under a cooperative agreement. These are communities that are predominantly African American, other communities of color, low SES. And we believe that we won because of our past work in those specific communities as ABNA, but also our individual service to community organizations that are either in those communities or that serve those communities. Again, I look forward to this, and I'm about to turn this over to Audrey.
Hi, thank you so much, Nicole. I'm so happy to be here today to talk about developing equitable projects. Again, my name is Audrey Wennink, and I work for the Metropolitan Planning Council in Chicago. We are a nonprofit, 87-year-old independent non-governmental organization. We work at the intersection of government, community, and business to advocate for policies that will advance a sustainable, equitable, and prosperous region. We have staff here that work on land use, planning, housing, environment, and transportation. And we develop original research to define problems. We identify policy solutions, and we advocate for these solutions. So we are often thinking about project development from a policy standpoint and from a collaborative standpoint. In order to build projects that create a more equitable transportation system, I think we all know that we need to focus more on transit, biking, and walking, which are affordable, sustainable, and improve public health. We have underinvested in these modes, and we need to make sure that there are resources to fund these types of projects that we need more of. And I want to highlight some work that MPC did a couple years ago. We did a report called Transit Means Business, and I'll drop the link into the chat about this report, where this report was intended to help raise the profile of the importance of transit that as we were doing the Rebuild Illinois capital bill. So we made sure that transit got actually dedicated capital funding in the capital bill. And so our transit systems now have predictable, reliable funding to maintain their system and build projects. So this is the type of thing that that is very important even before projects are designed. We have also partnered with a mobility justice organization called Equiticity to conduct open-ended focus group research on how people on the south and west sides of Chicago experience transportation and how they make transportation choices. Understanding mobility barriers to marginalized communities was developed in 2 reports, one about access to work and one about access in communities. And what I would really want to highlight about this work is this was a time when we asked really open-ended questions of people, and I'm dropping this into the chat as well, about what is their experience using transportation. And what we found was that there are many, many factors that are not those that we typically think of as being central to transportation that have a huge impact on people's use of transportation. This can involve community context, public safety, and other types of things that people make decisions about what type of transportation they're going to use. So it's useful as we're developing projects. We think very early and ask very broad questions of what people need, about what people need, so that the projects are really addressing their needs. And then I'll give one more example. We have worked on developing a toolkit for employers about supporting transportation. And this is because, as we all know, there are a large number of people in our region that live in economically disconnected areas. 2.8 million people, according to CMAP's calculations. And these areas are often isolated from major employment centers, and residents face long and unreliable commutes. And at the same time, many of the employers in our region are in places not accessible to transit. And some facts that people don't always recognize are that in Chicago, 27% of households do not have a personal vehicle. And in the region as a whole, 13% of households don't have access to a personal vehicle. So that means a lot of jobs are inaccessible to people, and they're located in places where the land uses are such that we cannot necessarily operate transit because the densities don't support it. So what do? So we developed, as I said, this toolkit, which is for, and I'm dropping this in the chat as well, which helps businesses think about how they can support their employees and get access to a wider pool of talent, have more reliable commutes for people, and help people get a step up on the economic ladder. So these are different types of solutions that can help the most marginalized in our society, and are not necessarily always building something, but are developing policies and tools. And it's not always about how the project is developed. It can be about more what types of projects and policies we're advancing, how we're engaging the people who will be most affected by these policies and projects, and how we can go beyond preventing disproportionate impacts and provide disproportionate benefits to the communities that need them most. So I will stop there, and I will pass the microphone back to Janet. Thank you.
Well, this has been great so far. Thank you, Tara, Gina, Nicole, and Audrey. You all have tremendous experience, are doing great things to address diversity and inclusion in your work. Next, we're going to move into the question and answer portion. And as a reminder, if you have any questions, please enter them in the Q&A box that's located at the bottom of your screen. I'm going to go ahead and get started with a few questions that I've jotted down. Tara, if I can start with you, can you tell us how you have used equitable engagement to inform projects? And how do projects change when there is authentic engagement of affected communities in developing them?
Sure. Thanks, Janet. Hearing the storytelling again from the previous panel about, the disruption and displacement, even the transportation projects such as the Dan Ryan or, TOD development, that were cited, in the impact on the quality of life, for residents, hearing that, it was just like, wow, we have so much work to do, but, this episode is focusing on, again, the project development activities, that foster, inclusive, strategies and practices. And I think that since the Dan Ryan was built, right, I mean, the state and federal highways, they do prescribe a general strategy with the intent for, notification and inclusion. But I think it goes without saying, everyone here understands that we need to go beyond just checking those boxes, right? We're not getting the right people at the table, by just doing the minimum. So when we initiate a study, our goal is to get the right people, there. Some of our strategies consist of forming community advisory groups with elected officials and staff from the community. Requesting input on community needs and how they may be impacted by the project. I know last time we talked about it too with the COVID-19 pandemic, moving to virtual meetings. I don't know that we're ever going to go back to just in person because we want to broaden our reach to as many people as possible. So we see that as an area where we can continue to, again, just cast a wide net. And we're looking at the languages spoken within the limits of our projects. President Preckwinkle's administration provides just a plethora of resources that we can tap into to even understand, what language, should we be developing our materials in? So for our Burnham multimodal connector, for instance, or for the fair transit, demonstration, we're developing content and materials and delivery in more than just, English. Until we go as far as dropping off the materials at all the village halls. We try to put up flyers for where people are paying their water bills just so that they could hear more about our projects. Sometimes we put up a changeable message board along the road saying public meeting is tonight, and so you heard from my opening remarks about how the focus areas and investments that the county is making. And, we have such a great team here at the county who are just passionate about the issue of equity. And we do keep asking ourselves how we can do better. And we recognize that significant progress, it takes time, it takes a commitment, and, it takes, being accountable. And, Duana mentioned that previously that, as presenters, that we should be speaking about things we want the WTS membership to hear. And so at this time, I would like to say that, we need the industry's talent and creativity to really help us do better and, build from the current practices that we have to generate new ideas so that we can be as inclusive as part of our projects as possible. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate those thoughts. And I agree, we all do need to do better. And I think that virtual meetings will become part of all of our plans moving forward, even when we start doing things in person again, just so that, like you said, we can reach more people. Audrey, a question for you. How have you engaged diverse communities in project development, such as older adults, youth, people with disabilities, and the Black and Brown residents?
Yes, hi. I would like to highlight a project that we worked on called toward universal mobility, charting a path to improve transportation accessibility. And I'm going to drop that one in the chat too. This was a project that we took on about 2 years ago, and the intention was to understand how people with disabilities and seniors access the transportation system throughout the entire region, including both fixed route transit and paratransit and the supporting systems for those modes of transportation. And when we took this on, we realized that we partnered with Access Living, which is a disability organization. We partnered with AARP to get the perspectives of seniors. We had a whole technical committee of experts that worked in these communities. We did meetings with the transit ADA committees and got direct input from people that have disabilities that are using this system and seniors as well. This study revealed that our trains and buses can be very difficult for anyone to use with a disability, and paratransit options are limited and fractured. The study's top recommendation was actually to create a mobility coordinator to help break down some of these silos and help give more cohesive information to people and make our system more cohesive. And I'm happy to report that RTA is actually studying this recommendation right now, and we're hopeful we'll make a recommendation to formally staff such a position. A second facet of that I just want to highlight is one of the recommendations out of that study was to look at ADA transition plans. So that is the plans that came out of the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act 30 years ago, that every community is supposed to have. And we realized, we conducted research in the Northeastern Illinois and learned that only 11% of communities have a valid ADA transition plan and have partnered with Access Living and others that specialize in ADA transition plans to get the word out, and hope that more communities can do this, and then build out their sidewalks and their crosswalks so that they are supportive and do not have barriers for people with disabilities. But there's a long way to go in our region's communities to get there.
And Janet, if I could just add a little bit to that. So with what Audrey was saying and Tara was saying previously, it's just important that we continue to reach out in different ways. Just like we're trying to be diverse in our planning efforts or our project development, we also have to be diverse in our reach out efforts. And virtual meetings we found have been very successful, but we also have to realize not everybody has internet, not everybody has a computer. Just from some volunteer work I do, I know that texting is the mode of choice in terms of, technology. So, how do you reach a diverse group of people and inform them or let them inform you, I should say, in terms of your planning process? Is it paper flyers? Is it paper surveys? Not that we want to go back to the old way of doing business, but we have to also realize that we need a variety of outreach methods to engage as many types of people as possible. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And it's not just about how we reach people, it's also about their affordability and the affordability of our transportation to users of our system. And I think that that's really underappreciated, that there's many low-income households that the cost of transportation is really a significant burden. Many cannot afford to own a car or can't drive because of their age or their ability. Tara, I'm wondering, how can we better consider transportation costs to users as we develop projects?
That's something, Janet, that we've been, studying and working on. So, a couple of things. I think first, in January of this year, Cook County and the region's transit agencies launched a 3-year pilot to improve transit service and bring transit equity to the residents of South Cook County. Because transportation, as you said, transportation affordability is a major issue, particularly in the Fair Transit South Cook program area. So in that area, transportation costs are 20 to 50% of the census tract median income, of the census tracts for that program area. So Black residents of the region have by far the longest commutes of any group, spending 21% longer on work trips than whites. Much of that is driven by, commutes on the south side of Chicago and South Cook. So the Fair Transit South Cook program area has like a high concentration of residents that are spending over an hour commuting to work. And I think Audrey mentioned it previously, and Audrey, I already have like a page and a half of notes on everything you've been sharing with us, so thank you. But that, there's zero vehicle households are also concentrated along the electric district in the city of Chicago and entering south suburbs. So this pilot provides up to a 53% fare reduction on the Metro Electric and Rock Island commuter rail lines. It also supports PACE's enhancement of the Halsted number 352 bus route. So it's more frequent service. It's between 79th Street and Chicago Heights Terminal, but it's the only 24-hour route between them. And this pilot's made possible because Cook County is underwriting the costs for each of the participating agencies. But in addition to that, we are, IDOT recently awarded UIC a SPR grant. It's a state planning and research grant to complete an equity study on our Invest in Cook program that I mentioned earlier. Together with UIC and the Center for Neighborhood Technologies like Transportation Equity Network and other users, we're going to work on developing equity-focused performance measures that can be used to evaluate and improve equity impacts of Invest in Cook projects, and also that of IDOT and local governments can incorporate into the project prioritization processes. So the affordability is something like we're trying to look at it from several different angles. We're hoping that in terms of transit access, over the next few years that we'll see some good data from that from this program. But then also, we're 5 years into the Invest in Cook program, so now is a good time to look back to see, again, just how we can continue to evolve these programs to have the intended impact and outcomes that we're striving for.
Great, thank you. Nicole, I want to turn it over to you. You talked a lot about the importance of being out in the community and that your staff are actually very involved with the community, working as professors and getting on village boards. And I'm wondering, can you talk to us at all about any projects that you might have worked on to reduce the harm that has occurred from the history of highway building, just through rebuilding these community connections?
Well, I wish that I had that opportunity. Interestingly, I'm actually pursuing a diversity, equity, and inclusion graduate certificate at a university downstate, and that has come up quite a bit. One of the things is that in some of the communities downstate that we've been dealing with are starting to look at things like when we're talking about tax credit, and I apologize for my lighting. I was sitting still too long. Sorry about that. Is making sure that when we offer projects for tax credits for the surrounding infrastructure, that we're making sure that some of those projects are directed to marginalized communities, especially those where we've plowed through with highways, or we've taken land for public projects, or we've taken land for drainage or things like that, to make sure that some of those underserved communities get the benefits of those tax dollars that they contribute to. So I wouldn't say that is something that we have been particularly engaged with, but as I mentioned before, we are involved with we're involved with a group of communities now. They're small communities that have banded together. They happen to all fall in one school district, so you can imagine how small they are. And they are doing that. I think someone mentioned earlier about disinvestment. And so trying to reinvest dollars in communities and make sure that they have the knowledge base and the access to opportunities to continue to build and make their communities safe and equitable and drivable and livable. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Next question is for Gina. Can you talk about when initiating a transit plan, what practices you follow to encourage equity in the plan results?
Well, Janet, as I stated earlier, we do follow the federal guidelines, but we also identify the transit dependent populations. So beyond the EJ populations, we do a thorough socioeconomic analysis of our study area to identify where those communities are, whether they're elderly, those with disabilities, minority, low income, zero car households, and so on. But we also really lean on our stakeholders as part of our engagement plan to identify where those communities are, because they might not be a large part of the study area, but they're a really important part of the study area. And we want to make sure that any of our transit services are distributed equitably in that community or in that study area, and not necessarily equally, truthfully. So we really do a thorough analysis of where those populations are and whether or not there's beneficial or adverse impacts.
I guess I want to follow up on that a little bit. Sometimes we don't know what we don't know, and what we might think is good may not be seen as good by the community. Can you provide an example of a project where it's assumed the results will benefit the EJ community, but in actuality, it could be adverse instead?
So I'm working on a freight planning project actually right now. And as part of that study, we're identifying opportunity sites. So vacant land that would be good to develop in terms of industrial development, warehouse development, possibly commercial development. So it all sounds great, right? So it's economic development opportunities for communities that maybe currently have brownfield sites or just vacant land that you would think would be really important for them to want to develop. But really, there might be more truck traffic going by some residential, areas. There might be congestion on the arterial streets or the secondary streets leading to those opportunity sites. There might be more noise. There might be more truck crashes. So, even though I, as the planner, might think, oh, this is great, we're promoting economic development in this community, it might not really be that. So it's part of this study will now be to reach out, is to reach out to these communities and to the stakeholders and really get their input on what they value and feel is important for their individual communities.
Thank you. I'm going to go away from my list for a minute because I see that we're getting close on time and I want to get to some of these questions that we've got from our participants. So the first question, how can planning and project development improve structural deficiencies that are also causing violence in many of our communities? I'm not sure who wants to take the first stab at that one.
I'll give a stab and ask our public partners to weigh in. Actually, I was discussing that back and forth in the chat with the person who provided that. And I think one of the issues is we have to look at, when we look at planning, we have to look at the practicality of our public spaces and the transportation corridors to and from. Make sure that they are as easily accessible and safe both day and night. So a very pretty archway, nice tunnel may seem useful and interesting, but those may be harbingers of different kinds of activities late at night. They may not be as safe for some populations. They may also, while they look nice, may not provide any practical access. If I understood the question properly, it's about making sure that we have spaces that are durable, but also we don't create spaces that encourage or that create an unsafe environment for the public. That's how I understood the question. I don't know if Audrey or Gina wanted to weigh in.
Yeah, I can jump in. I mean, I think one example, I totally agree with what you said, Nicole. one example is the Elevated Chicago program, which is about equitable transit-oriented development. And that program has made a large effort to look at the whole station area. They're focusing on 7 stations throughout Chicago, and I'll drop that link into the chat as well, so you can just see the program. And they really have taken the approach of working with communities. They have established community tables at each of these station areas so that the community members are generating ideas about what needs to happen in those station areas, because they know what would make them feel safe, what would make the station area more appealing, such as creating programming, public art, public markets, positive activities that make station areas places people want to be. And they've also actually done an ambassadors program last year where they train people in communities to reach out about equitable development. So I think it's creating new places where you can get input from community members. And a lot of times there are low cost things that can be done fairly quickly, that can be built and iterated. I think one other point I would make is all too often in transportation, there's a big focus on mega projects and designing a project, and then 10 years later you spent $500 million, but what happens in between? And that there's an opportunity for us to do more technical urbanism, small scale things that are maybe temporary installations that people can experience physically and see how it works for them, and then we can tweak it, and then we can make it more permanent. So there's an opportunity to do more iterative type of project planning.
And Janet, if I may just emphasize one thing, we professionals look for best practices and systems and processes that work globally. But what we have to remember when we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, what works out in the burbs is not going to work in the inner city. What works on the north side is not going to work on the south side. And it's important to really get that knowledge from the community and get their buy-in, because sometimes it doesn't matter how good an idea is, if the community doesn't have any buy-in, feel like it was done for them, that's what's going to create a disconnect in terms of safety, in terms of usage, in terms of the sustainability of the infrastructure itself.
Thanks. And so there's one more question that I want to make sure that we address in our last couple of minutes here. Any tips for genuine, meaningful engagement when you're on a compressed timeline outside of the project's control? And I'll just say that that's a tough thing, because we want to make sure we're doing a lot of engagement, because if you don't take the time up front to do it, you might end up with longer delays and postponing a project in the end. Does anybody want to add some tips on that?
No, but I think I agree with you. I mean, Janet, it may backfire on you, right? If you don't have time to engage people and then the project is advertised. I had a transit center study, a little bus terminal in downstate, and it wasn't well advertised in terms of the site that was selected. And then all of a sudden the neighborhood got word of it and came out in full force at the public meeting that we were holding. And the other 2 public meetings, no one had attended because, it just wasn't advertised well. But then all of a sudden, when someone had notice, they came out and the project was canceled. So I think you really need to advertise as best as you can, even on a short time frame, in order to get as many people to be involved.
And if I could just add, I think not really understanding like the question, I think it depends on the scope of the project, right? I mean, one of the things that, our team is doing here, we're, have a pretty aggressive pavement rehabilitation program coming out over the next few years. But, as part of that, we're talking to the forest preserves to say, like, where are your mid-block crossing priority locations where while we're in there, we could do some signing and striping and really improve the visibility of, the users of the system, right? So I think that
my advice would be, besides trying to be as inclusive as you can, the changeable message boards like on the roadway, I mean, is a good idea because those are the users. They're going to be there seeing it, but to try to, make sure that whatever you're proposing is scalable or forward compatible. I think that sometimes you have to build projects in that way simply because of funding constraints, or because, future projects might come, down the horizon where, you need to establish additional infrastructure or, bus stops or so forth. So.
All good points. Thank you. And really, thank you everyone for your participation and all the great questions. We're about out of time. I will share a few links in the chat on related resources where you can learn more about this topic. And now I will turn it over to Beth Norton for a few final remarks.
Yes, thank you for joining us today. A big thank you to our panelists and moderator and all our participants. Before closing, we want to take a minute to acknowledge and thank our WTS partners and friends for your support. We will be offering PDHs for our Equity and Transportation series. The PDH certificate will be sent out to all attendees via email after the meeting today. Please watch out for upcoming events in November and also for future episodes in 2022 for the Equity and Transportation series. Have a great day. Thank you.